Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today I'd like to talk about Disney movies from another perspective. And the reason I'd like to do this is because about like a week or two ago, I saw a news article where some guy was talking about how Cinderella is a blight on our moral fabric these days. You know, kids watch Cinderella and they think that if you are just really good and you wash the floors, then you'll become a princess. And that's terrible. He, had his angry moral drum to beat. And then he started going on about how Frozen taught everything that kids would need to know today. Frozen was a revolutionary, groundbreaking, mind-shattering movie. And oh my gosh, like more kids should watch Frozen. And so I thought this was a little weird because what's interesting about stories is, morals are always relative. You can always look at things from different perspectives. And there are some Disney movies, actually most Disney movies, it's very clear-cut who the villains are, and the morals that they're going for are not very ambiguous. But there are a few movies, though, where, it can be complained a little bit. One of the big ones is Beauty and the Beast, because people kind of talk about, Beast wasn't really that much of a good guy character. He was actually kind of the villain through most of the movie. And then, and because of Stockholm Syndrome, he sort of becomes the good guy after Belle gets used to him. So people sort of harp on that one. But I feel like Frozen is also one of those movies that's very relative. It depends on kind of your perspective of the movie. And this is sort of, I think, a very healthy way to look at movies, because when you start to examine them from different perspectives, you realize kind of how they told the story, and you can sort of look at ways that they affected your perspective to kind of make you come to the conclusion that you wanted. Because, they really could have made it seem throughout the entire movie that Beast was a kind of a terrible creature. If they didn't show you some of the scenes where Beast was warming up, or they didn't have the scenes where Beast was talking about Belle, or if he didn't willfully let Belle go because he had gotten to care for her, then he would have remained a villain. They never would have had the turnaround, and, it would have been a terrible monster throughout the whole movie. His death would not have been bad, I guess. I don't know. But Gaston, also kind of funny. If you think about Gaston, he was really well beloved by the people in the town. And another reason I kind of wanted to talk about this is because I was discussing Disney villains with Kenza, which ones were my favorite. As a kid, my favorite villain was always Scar, and I liked him because he was a lion. But as an adult, I still really love Scar, but I love him for different reasons. These days, I love him, as Kenza has told me, the guy who was originally... There's a book or a story that Lion King is based on, and in that story, the character that Scar is, his real name was something like Garbage, like Mufasa means king or something like that, and then Scar's actual name was Garbage. So Disney changed his name to Scar because that was like less obvious that he was a stupid garbage king. But anyway though, so Scar, he's just like, I just want to be noticed. His whole song, and unseen for the wonder I am. He's just kind of like insecure and just wants to be doted after and loved. And so he gets to the throne and he sees his power, and he's just a worthless king. He's just kind of sitting around, gorging himself on whatever meat comes in until they run out of meat. There was a scene that they cut, actually, where he tries to get Nala to sleep with him. And, Nala's trying to explain. She's like, we are starving to death. Scar, we are Scar! And he just keeps going let me touch your butt, Nala. He had a song. And so she eventually slaps him, and or with the claws out and everything. And then he's just like, oh, Nala. And so they cut it, though, because I think they thought it was a little too creepy. It took things a little bit too far with Scar. But it really illustrated what a terrible creature he actually was. He just wanted all the lavishment and praise that went into being king. Scar didn't actually want to be king. He just wanted to be appreciated. So I like him for that reason. He cracks me up because he's such a stupid, just kind of flamboyant, I just want to be loved. I don't want to do anything to deserve the love. That's work, So that it just kind of amuses me that Scar was like that. But the other character, my other favorite Disney villain, is Gaston. And Gaston for kind of similar reasons, because he's more confident maybe than Scar is. Scar's just kind of depressed and mopey and no one cares about me. But Gaston is the same sort of insecurity and the same sort of self-absorption, but everybody in town loves him for whatever reason. And it always baffled me. As a kid, I never understood why Gaston was so popular in the town. But as an adult, I can kind of understand it. And the more I kind of wrap my head around it, the more I realized that Gaston was probably a hero to that town, and that I bet his death was like considered a tragedy and they mourned it, and the only reason why they didn't continue to try to kill the beast was because he became a prince, and after that it becomes like regicide or whatever, and nobody wanted to get tangled up in that. You know, like Gaston was great, but you know, king has money. So yeah, it's all just kind of very much weird, like it's all very relative. So anyway, though, so based on this rant that this guy made about Frozen being like the biggest, best movie ever, like I said, I wanted to kind of look at Beauty and the Beast and Frozen and sort of look at where things diverge a bit and how you kind of get to the perspective that you do. Now, in Beauty and the Beast, we have Gaston is kind of established as sort of a jackass, but it's all sort of told from the perspective of Belle. And what's really interesting about that is that Belle actually has a very unique perspective within the little town that she lives in. In her opening song, she's going on about how there has to be more than this provincial life. She really doesn't seem all that into the town that she's in. Her head's always in the clouds, as they say. She's always reading a lot of books. And you notice that when Gaston comes up, he remarks on how, like, he just goes, books, this is stupid. I can't even, like, there's no pictures in this book. And that actually makes sense, because if you look at that time period, probably it was a very rare skill to be able to read, and the fact that Belle could do it made her pretty extraordinary and probably fantastically intelligent, given the fact that she was just a peasant woman. She had all kinds of big dreams because she read a lot of books that sort of instilled these dreams in her, but everyone else in town, they were like simple peasant folk. You know, you had the baker and the farmers and whatever, and a woman really kind of got by finding a husband and getting married. And Gaston was like the best hunter in town. He was a huge guy. He was incredibly handsome. All the local girls loved him. And he was a very simple guy, very conceited guy. But the fact is, he sings this song and he goes, I use antlers in all of my decorating. And so the guy's obviously a fantastic hunter, and I bet that he was a huge boon for the fur trade out there. Like maybe they survived on fur or something like that. And so this is what I started thinking about, is that Gaston must have been really famous because everybody in that town was really simple, and Gaston brought in a whole ton of fur, and he was really big and he was really handsome, and he was kind of a dick. But everybody sort of loved him anyway, and so they just sort of let him get away with being a dick. He was kind of like they regarded him as he was a dick, but he was good for the community. And the girls loved him because he was big, and those girls in town, you know, they were going to get married, and that was kind of going to be it. They were going to get married, and they were going to have kids. So Gaston was like a potential provider, and actually a fantastic provider, probably one of the best ones in town. So when Gaston approaches Belle, and he's thinking that she's going to marry him, he does so in his totally self-absorbed, you know, like, of course, I'm the most handsome guy in town. This is going to work out fantastically. And he approaches Belle, and he's just like, hey, Belle, how about I stick my junk in your junk? And she turns him down. And he's just kind of, like, baffled. Because Gaston really is, like, that's it. Like, Gaston is the top of the he's the top of the food chain. He's the biggest fish in this little pond. He is the best guy. Gaston's other choice was like the baker, who's already married or whatever. They really didn't introduce any other eligible guys. I mean, like, if they'd had some other guys who were maybe like nicer than Gaston, then that would have made sense. But as a kid, I remember always thinking that it was really weird that the town loved Gaston when he was clearly such a jerk. I got to thinking that maybe the entire town was evil, except for Belle and her dad, for whatever reason. This was something that came across just due to the way that the perspective worked. Was because everything kind of came from Belle's perspective, Gaston seems like an awful person, and the townspeople were all kind of like in the background. They were really kind of meaningless. Belle didn't pay much attention to him. She walked around town with her head in the book. She wasn't really looking at anyone. She was just like, you know, hello, bonjour, how is your wife? And just kind of looking around, not really paying attention. Everything is from Belle's perspective. So when she meets the Beast for the first time, he's kind of this horrifying creature. And he's always drawn in a lot of darkness and a lot of shadows. He looks scary. They put particular emphasis on his teeth. But as Belle gets to know him and as she gets comfortable with him, they start drawing him out in the light more often, playing with birds, seeming really friendly, and eventually things kind of turn around. And he's a really nice guy, sort of. And they say this is like where the Stockholm Syndrome sets in, and so they say that's where the morals get wonky in Beauty and the Beast. But Gaston actually sets out to go kill the Beast because they think he's terrible. And again, if you think about this, it's actually kind of a heroic thing that Gaston does. Now, granted, I'm not saying that Gaston is actually a hero, because you know that he tries to have Belle's dad committed to a mental hospital. And that whole scene was kind of funny. They hired Tony J to be the guy in charge of the mental hospital, and he's just like, yes, I, Tony J, love evil money. And I mean, like, Tony J, he's always, I mean, he's the voice for like a horrific villain. So they bring in Tony J to do that. So Gaston, like, anytime you make a deal with Tony J as the devil, you know you're making a deal with somebody truly evil, because that's what they always do. That's who they always bring Tony J in to voice. Gaston should have known. As soon as Tony J walked in the room, she'd have been like, oh, Tony J, boy, you must be a really evil character. I mean, if they'd hired the guy who did SpongeBob, it would have been a slightly different meaning. But yeah, so Gaston, he wasn't like a good guy. His main flaw was just that he was so conceited that he never really thought about what he was doing in regards to other people. He kind of considered everybody from his own limited perspective. And Belle, I guess, kind of did the same. What's interesting, though, is that Beast, he was a lot like Gaston. I mean, it was so bad, actually, that there was a scene they had in that movie, and they cut this, but there was a scene where Beast admits that he can't read, and so Belle sits down and she teaches him to read. He expresses an interest in doing it, and I guess they cut it because it didn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, like, for one thing, he was a prince, so he should have been able to read. I mean, why would he forget how to read? And for another, it probably made it to where he was too similar to Gaston, except for that he was just more reclusive. He was more reclusive and weird. You know, he was kind of more like Belle's books. And so people kind of get into this whole Stockholm thing, where they think about, like, well, you know, Belle developed Stockholm. And with a normal person, this would have been true. But I kind of feel like with Belle, it worked because Belle she read a lot of books, but they were all kind of like fantasy novels, and she sort of wanted to go out and do something magical and different. I mean, she really didn't want to be like a peasant. She didn't really want to live a normal life. She sang a song about it. So she was probably the only person in that town who really could have encountered a creature like the Beast, and then sort of warm up to the idea of being involved with him. For one thing, she actually agreed to be the prisoner in place of her father. And it's stuff like this, I think, that kind of builds up the perspective where it's not quite as bad of a moral. I mean, like, you still get kind of a weird Stockholm Syndrome thing when you come down to it. But it's a little bit weird because Belle herself is kind of, she's kind of different. She's got a slightly more fanciful, romantic take on life. And the whole thing was kind of a fanciful romance. So it worked for her. And like I say, this is one of those, like, Beauty and the Beast is one that you can kind of look at from a couple different perspectives. And you can see where Gaston was maybe a little bit heroic in some places, and why the town would love him, and why the Beast was actually kind of terrible, and maybe why Belle's relationship with Beast was sort of unhealthy. But there's not a lot of really clear-cut good and bad within that movie. There's a lot more of don't judge a book by its cover sort of thing going on. And because of that, you kind of get, like, the really negative appearances up front, and then they kind of become like, it's like, oh, there's positive stuff behind it. But the trouble with that whole message is that sometimes a book is exactly like its cover. Like, you look at the cover and you see, like, oh, this is exactly what this book is about. So that's kind of why it's a bit of a flaky moral. It's not real good. It was a great movie, I think. A very fun movie, a good movie to watch. I enjoyed it. But you know, the moral is, you need to have a really good sense of judgment if you want to use that moral correctly. Frozen now, though. Let's talk about Frozen. Now, Frozen I've been seeing a lot of people praise, and I don't know why they praise it, because it's really not very revolutionary. Like, they talk about, like, oh, well, you know, it demonstrated that you could have platonic love between family. Lilo and Stitch did that. Of course, a lot of people love Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch was a good movie. But Frozen really they didn't do anything revolutionary. I think the only thing that they did was they had the bait and switch where they made you think that the love was going to be between Anna and that boy, and then it wound up just being between the two sisters. And I think that's the only thing, I think that might be the only thing that people really hooked onto, is they were just like, oh, you know, this movie is so self-aware, you know. So it's a little bit pretentious, I think, the people who think that movie is the best movie ever, because they're just like, oh, the movie is so self-aware. All other movies follow these ridiculous, terrible tropes. And you know what's sad is that Disney freaking established the tropes. I mean, they were the ones who built them. It really wasn't, well, okay, I shouldn't say that they built them, but I mean, they were the ones that really brought them into a real strong focal point in American culture, or made them, like people kind of looked at Disney for inspiration, and so Disney really kind of strengthened and reinforced these tropes that people use. And tropes are tools. Tropes are not always bad, they're not always good, it just kind of depends on your skill with using them. So that's what I think the Frozen audience does, is that they kind of look at Frozen and they're like, oh, they broke the tropes, they're so self-aware, just like me. I realize all these other movies are bad, and so does Frozen. And in reality though, Frozen actually has as much of because they use the bait and switch tactics, they are about as ambiguous as Beauty and the Beast. I was thinking about this, and Elsa is actually the antagonist through most of the movie. It's a little bit like Beauty and the Beast in the fact that the Beast starts off as kind of a bad guy, and then later develops into a good guy. Except in this, it's like Elsa kind of is supposed to be a sympathetic character, but she's still the antagonist. She's the source of drama and conflict within the movie. Later on, you have Hans, but Hans is like only an antagonist for the last act, and it's really kind of like his whole act was that he refused to get help for Anna, and he couldn't have helped Anna anyway. I mean, there was nothing that he could have done to fix her because he didn't really love her. They'd only just met. So what I thought was funny about the movie is that you go through in the whole opening section of Frozen, you've got Anna and Elsa singing to each other because Elsa freezes Anna's brain. She gives her brain freeze with her ice powers, and so they take Anna to these trolls, and the trolls erase her memory so that she no longer remembers having her brain frozen, and everything's good, everything's great, and so Anna's just kind of running around, a happy little girl, and then her parents die. So from this point forward, Anna is basically isolated from any and all social contact, and she keeps trying to go to Elsa, and she's like, hey Elsa, let's hang out, and Elsa's stressed out and worried about her ice powers, and she's really emotional, and she doesn't want to hang out. So, they sing this whole song, do you want to build a snowman? And Elsa's just in there like, screw off, Anna, go away, I'm sick of you. And so Anna just hangs around, she's like, I'm bored. Fast forward 15 years, and I guess this is the first amount of social interaction she's had in 15 years, but she goes out and she meets a guy, and he goes, hey baby, you have a beautiful smile, and she goes, wow, let's get married. And my impression of this was that Anna was so inept socially, because she just grew up in kind of an isolated castle with nobody really watching her or treating her like a little girl, that she just didn't know how to act with people. So the first guy to walk up to her and show her any amount of affection, she was so attention-starved that she thought that this guy was the one. I'm in love with this guy, I'm gonna build my life with him. I mean, hey, he said hello to me. No one has done that in 15 years. Everyone else just stands idly by and waits for me to dismiss them because they are my staff. So, I guess that this relationship between Anna and Elsa was so bad that Anna just really never developed as a person. So she goes to tell Elsa, I'm gonna get married, and Elsa gets mad and then freezes over the whole kingdom. She submerges it into a horrible blizzard that threatens to kill everybody. And she completely turns a blind eye to the kingdom. She's not aware that this is happening. She just runs off to the mountains, and then she sings her song, let it go, let it go. And it was a good song. I know that there are some parents who would rather kill themselves than hear that song sung again, but that was kind of her thing. So she went off and she sequesters herself alone so that she can brood and think about how much of an ice queen she is, and I don't even know. I'm really not sure what you would do after building yourself an ice palace out on the mountains, but that's what Elsa does. So Anna goes out to see her, and Elsa summons a snow monster to throw Anna out. I mean, Anna tries to tell her, like, oh, you froze over the kingdom, and Elsa says, get out, do you wanna not build a snowman? And she goes, no, Anna, go away, and so she throws her out of the freaking castle. The snow monster gets angry and nearly kills her. I mean, like, this is kind of how negligent Elsa is. She's not even watching to make sure that her new snow monstrosity is behaving in the way she wants. She just assumes the horrible snow demon is going to behave well, and it doesn't. As far as the snow demon assumes, the snow creature actually assumes that it killed Anna and the guy, and then it goes home. And I mean, like this is one of these things. This is where the movie starts, I think, takes a turn where it starts to have actually kind of a really poor moral, because you start to realize that Elsa is so against spending time with Anna that it's almost life-threatening to Anna. And in fact, you go on and they go through all this crap, and eventually Anna winds up getting hit with the snow again, but this time in her heart. And I can't remember when this actually happened in the movie. But Elsa, again, the whole thing is that she gets emotional, right? She gets emotional, she gets angry, she shoots Anna in the chest with her ice powers, and Anna's gonna die. Now, like I said, people say that this is a fantastic moral. This movie had fantastic morals. But if you think about that, let's suppose that Elsa didn't have ice powers. Let's suppose that Elsa communicated this same emotional outburst through hitting. Let's suppose that she walked up and she said, "No, Anna, go away," and then just backhanded her across the face. Or shoved her down the stairs, and like Anna hit her head and went into a coma, and the only thing that could get her out of the coma was love. When you think of it from this perspective, when you realize that Elsa was basically lashing out in a fit of emotion at her sister in a way that led to her sister nearly dying, that's abuse, right? I mean, when you think about when people are actually going to hurt one another, a lot of times it's not because like, oh, I am premeditated, I'm like planning ahead of time, I'm going to injure you. Most of the time it's just an act of passion. You lose your temper, you lose control of your emotions, you injure someone. This is exactly what Elsa does. So they run around and they do all their shtick, and then they get back into town, and then Hans turns out to be evil. And I don't know why Hans turns out to be evil. I mean, he probably could have just married Anna and then had just been in charge. It didn't seem like the two girls had like any control whatsoever of the kingdom. I mean, Elsa was completely isolated. It would have been very easy to do a coup. I mean, who did she have as a political ally? Nobody. But of course, this is for kids, so they really don't go into that whole thing. But Hans is like, I reveal now that I was evil all along, and he becomes kind of the antagonist, like a last-minute antagonist who was like, yes, it was actually me. I was the bad guy that you weren't really watching for. Also, too, kind of like Gaston, he goes out to go kill Elsa, and truth be told, that even that wasn't really that villainous, because if you think about it, Elsa's ice powers they were going to kill the whole kingdom, and presumably, if Elsa died, then the kingdom would warm up again and everything would be fine. And I mean, it's not like Elsa was going to rule the kingdom. She went off to go live alone. I mean, she wasn't going to be involved with people anymore. But I think the whole reason, like I say, unlike Beast, like people look at a character like Beast and they think about like, oh, what horrible Stockholm syndrome. She forced Belle to fall in love with her and all this and all that. Well, I mean, like Elsa, Beast made Belle live with him for, how long? Like a year, maybe? A couple months? They don't really specify. Just a while. And, but Elsa lived with Anna and kind of abused her and really didn't pay attention to her and starved her for attention and everything else for all of, 15 years. Whatever. And I mean, it's not too fair to say that. You can't really make a direct comparison because Elsa is Anna's sister. It's not like a little girl should have responsibility over another little girl. But their relationship just wasn't established in the movie. I'm told that Frozen actually had a deleted scene where Anna and Elsa interacted as they were growing up. They actually talked a little bit more and they made it clear that they had a relationship. But based on what the movie displayed in theaters, there was not a positive relationship between the sisters. And it only gets more sour as Elsa leaves. So finally at the end, I mean, Hans dies, I think, or whatever. I can't recall. Again, I watched this on a plane, and so I don't really remember. I didn't go back and check. Hans dies, or maybe Hans gets his pants pulled over his head. Whatever fitting punishment is deserved of the villain of the last 30 minutes of the movie. And then it turns out that Elsa's love for Anna is able to cure the curse that turns Anna into snow, revealing that as long as somebody is emotionally distraught and needy, and as long as even though they're ignoring all your needs and they are completely self-absorbed and they nearly kill the entire kingdom because they are focused on their own needs and they don't want to come home because they're scared or whatever, as long as you continue to provide them support, even at the expense of your own life and your own happiness, then you will be rewarded in the end by that person coming around and admitting that they loved you all along, and maybe they will save you from the death that they kind of inadvertently caused. Like I say, it's imagine if instead of ice powers, Elsa had just shoved Anna down the stairs. It really would have been a slightly different story, but pretty much the same message. And so that's why I thought it was really funny to see somebody ranting about how Frozen was like the pinnacle of morality. Because unlike Cinderella, which had a pretty clear-cut moral, which was just that humility was more attractive than all the riches that the step family had, the morals in Frozen are a little bit wishy-washy because they're doing the bait and switch thing. They try to set it up like they're going to go for some traditional morals, and then they sort of bait and switch, and they're like, but really, sisterhood is more important than love, or whatever. And it's kind of like, man, you should have been building that up through the whole movie, because what you've got now is you look like you're trying to establish love as the most important thing, or like maybe not your first love. Like, you think that maybe with Hans, like if I mean, there were so many morals that they could have run with. Like maybe like your first love is not going to be your last love, or maybe your first love is not going to be your true love, because they had Hans, and like maybe they'd established a little bit more between Anna and Hans, and they'd been like, oh yeah, I think I'm in love with him. He's pretty great. I mean, he's a prince and all that. And then she meets the other guy, and she finds out she has a lot more in common with him. Would have been a good message, you know? Like, you don't have to devote yourself entirely to someone who you don't mesh with. I mean, take a practical approach to romance and love and stuff like that. Date when you're young, get used to the difference between genders, and kind of like learn what you like and learn what you want in a guy, you know, things like that. Would have been a good message. But they didn't do that because they kind of skirted around the guys. They tried to sort of they set the guys up and then sort of pulled the rug out from underneath them, and they're like, no, the guys aren't really important, and it's about the sisters. But they didn't set up the sisters either. So they were a little bit all over the place, and they never really established a very clear-cut, like, okay, I see where you're going with this. They did the whole thing, where like, oh, I see where you're going with this. Oh, you're going somewhere else. Okay, okay. Great. I mean, it's like the last 15 minutes of the movie, but yeah, your love between these two sisters, that's great. For these last 15 minutes, we'll build up their relationship, since they almost never talked to each other before. Okay. Great morals. So, yes. Anyway, Beauty and the Beast, Frozen, two movies you could look at from some very radically different perspectives. You could draw some different morals from those. I know the morals that the movie is actually supposed to be presenting in both Frozen and Beauty and the Beast. And I know you're not really supposed to regard Gaston as a villain. You're not supposed to regard him as a hero. The town loves him, but you, the viewer, are not supposed to love Gaston. If you were, then they probably would have done some things differently to make it to where you sort of empathized with him a little bit more. Whereas Elsa, you're not supposed to view her as a villain. You're supposed to empathize with her. So they tried to make sure that you empathized with her and understood what she was going through. Because the natural tendency with humans is to kind of look at people and assume that they do things because of them. You know, like, if we hadn't shown Elsa freaking out about her powers, like, imagine if we hadn't shown her childhood growing up with her becoming increasingly alarmed about her ice powers. Imagine if we'd skipped all that and we just jumped straight to, like, Elsa getting mad and then freezing the kingdom and then fleeing. She would have looked like, you know, she was a villain. You would have thought throughout the whole movie that Elsa was the bad guy. And even that, maybe they could have done something with, if like I'd said, maybe they'd focused on that as the moral. If the moral was kind of like everyone's the hero of your own story, then perhaps it would have been more concentrated, a bit more focused, with a stronger message. But like I say, they kind of didn't do that. What I think Frozen has value as is it's a lovely musical, but I don't know. Like I said, I don't know where people get all this. I don't know why people cherish it as a strong source of morals or a strong teaching element for kids. I don't think it's very strong for that. I mean, like I said, it depends on your perspective, but because you can look at this movie from different perspectives and draw different morals from it, it's possible to draw harmful morals from it. Although this is true of many things, and this is kind of the core behind literary critique. If you yourself are a writer or do something that's involved with this sort of thing, it's the kind of thing that you would want to think about quite a lot when you're writing your script or designing your cartoons or animation or comic or whatever it is that you may do. But anyway, I think that'll be it for today, so I will catch you guys next time.